Appreciate your attending today. I have two speakers today. eSecurity Solutions will be the first speaker. That'll be myself, Tom Ruffolo. I'm a CISA, and Stephen Helm, who's the Senior Product Manager at WatchGuard. First thing I'd like to do is just introduce the terms. XDR, technically, although it's misused heavily in the industry by manufacturers primarily, refers to enabling integrated security solution by integrating the functionality of all of the components within the security stack from that vendor. So it's a pretty simple concept. It is frequently misused to mean integration of intelligence from just about anything, but it is at its core defined to be manufacturing enabled integration of that particular security stack. MDR is also heavily misused, so worth talking about for a second. It basically managed detection and response, and it could refer to anything as managed detection and response, including a managed SIEM, which is managed from a SOC, or an EDR solution, which is endpoint detection and response, or an NDR, which is network detection and response. They are all technically MDR, but what they manage and what they detect and respond to is totally different. So I think it's important. In fact, one of the reasons I actually created the content for this presentation originally was for that purpose, was to reduce confusion amongst our customers. I'm going to start out with just the basic concept, right? Siloed security, right? This is the way security used to be, and maybe in some cases it still is. If you have a bunch of security products that don't talk to each other, then they are silos of security. You have firewalls that don't talk to the endpoint, that don't talk to the mail security. You manage them all separately. Even if you're standardizing on a particular vendor, they're all still silos of security, and you get what you get in each of those categories. And so that's an important concept, especially if you're looking at something like EDR, where you go, oh, I have MDR, you have EDR, and you have endpoint security monitoring, detection, and response. You do not have monitoring, detection, response for everything else. And so you need to be thinking about precisely what these solutions are delivering to you and whether or not they really do add enough value by themselves to be the kind of solutions you want to buy. So I think that I've already kind of talked about that. They are harder to monitor, detect, and respond with. They're not really as secure as they can be, and they do lack this APT, lateral protection solution, if they're silent, right? So then if you elevate that solution to XDR, now we're talking about a vendor that's got solutions in multiple categories that you want to buy, and you do buy, that talk to each other, and where they can share the threat information and also respond in a unified way. So you get a threat detected at the firewall and you shut down an endpoint. That's something that will not happen without XDR. And if you can do that with MFA and cloud security and mail security and all these other things, the more you can add, and also if they do important things with it, right? It's not just, okay, I'll shut something down. Like, you don't want to shut everything down just because something happened. You want to intelligently respond. Ideally, you detect and you have a very focused, granular response. And so an XDR solution, from your point of view, is a platform commitment. You're making a commitment to a platform from a vendor. It is not a vendor. It is not a SIEM. It is not complete monitoring of all security and your IT security key components. It is not that, right? But it is monitoring of all the security that particular vendor provides in an integrated way that adds value. Just another way to look at that is siloed security on the left is your basic core, right? That's what you can offer. It's what we were able to offer 10 years ago. Now we want to make decisions, presumably, because if you have XDR, you have more centralized monitoring, detection, and response. You can all see it, not just monitoring and management, but also you can see the threats. You can respond maybe in a proactive, interactive way and remediate. So you get the telemetry across the entire system. And if you go from good to better, that's great. Best is XDR plus something like an MDR leveraging a SIM, right? Not everybody needs that, but if you are regulation focused or you're high security focused, a SIM can add extra value because it monitors and manages all your security and your key IT. It does. It doesn't matter what vendor it's from. It doesn't discriminate, right? So it's really the apex predator, if you will, of monitoring and adding value. So at the very top, you've got apex, like a shark is apex, right? So apex level MDR using a SIM. Then you've got XDR, which is enabled security, enabling this cross-product security from your vendor across that product line. MDR, again, you've got all the flavors of MDR. Apex MDR with a SIM is top level. That's a SIM monitoring, managing everything. Then you got MDR like EDR, like endpoint detection response or network detection response, where they monitor and manage given select components. And if we have customers that have convinced themselves that EDR or NDR is MDR, and that's everything that they need. And I would say if you're really focused on security and you're focused on regulation compliance, it's not enough. But it is a component of it. It is technically MDR. If you're checking a box on an insurance form, that might be adequate. But it's one thing to check a box, and it's another one to sleep at night and know that you're secure. And then there's all the other security products that are siloed at the bottom, and those all can be managed, and they can be managed in an integrated way. They might even, if they're from a single vendor, might even have a single control panel to do that. But you still have elevated levels of security as you move up the stack here, and you add various types of security solutions like XDR or MDR with a SIM. Our eSecurity solutions provide 3 different types of solutions for customers, and our goal is to sort of be your one-stop security solution provider. It's GRC solutions with governance, risk and compliance, risk assessments, and things like that, security products, and managed detection and response, and managed security. And we do that to help our customers either be compliant, achieve strong security, or basic level security. Obviously, we prefer, that's it. And there actually was something on the bottom which isn't showing up, which is all of our list of vendors. If you look at the 3 different solution areas again, and you get, it's like a sample of what's in each of these. A lot of people don't understand what GRC solutions are. If you're intimately involved in regulations, you do probably, but penetration testing and vulnerability scanning is testing, and that's part of GRC. Gap analysis, you're looking for third-party gap analysis. That is GRC solutions that we provide that. If your regulation has to be compliant with a regulation and you want to do a pre-regulation audit, we do that. Certification, we can provide that. VCISO strategies or resources, incident response planning, incident response team, configuration testing. Those are all things that are under GSC that a lot of people don't take advantage of, but are quite important. Managed services, okay, managed security services, most people know what that is, but includes MDR with a SOC, SIMSOC, firewalls, cloud, security, MFA, etc. And then products, we actually try to add value with security product sales in that we work with our customers. And if we actually can help you, or at least fully understand what your security roadmap is and what's driving your decisions, and we understand your goals, we can then help you define the right products and the right solutions at the right price point so that you can afford to have solutions in all areas that you need security within your budget, right? Because everybody has a different budget, and I don't know any SMB that has the budget of an enterprise, and so you don't want to make the mistake of buying something that's too expensive in one category and run out of money for something that's emerging like SASE securities, cloud security. So these are all things you want to build in that. You want to do the risk assessment, and then you want to be able to define your plan, roadmap, and then you have to, and then you want to be able to figure out how you're going to spend that money to go get all the solutions you need in all these different areas. All right, with that, I want to turn it over to Stephen, who will give you the WatchGuard perspective.
Excellent.
On life as we know it.
All right, that's quite a promise on life as we know it, but I'll try and fulfill that promise. Thank you, Tom. I think that was a fantastic primer for a lot of the things we're going to talk about in this presentation. As Tom mentioned, my name is Stephen Helm. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at WatchGuard Technologies. I've been in cybersecurity for a little over 15 years. Really started out in the crypto space and PKI, and have expanded now to broader cybersecurity, network security, and obviously XDR. That we're going to talk about today. And I think Tom did a great job really talking about sort of that siloed security challenge and some of the things that XDR hopes to solve. And we're going to dig into those in a little bit more detail throughout the next 45 minutes or so. So just give you a sense of the agenda today. We'll start out with a bit of a discussion around the threat landscape and really what's changed. Before we talk about the cyber defense matrix, and I think it'll give you a nice context to how to think about your various security layers and where to place your bets, and really the importance of detection and response capabilities, how that's becoming more important. And that'll lead us into this discussion about what is XDR, right? And putting a little bit finer point on what XDR is, sort of that genesis of it, and how to think about the various solutions in the market and what to look for there. And finally, we'll sort of talk about the WatchGuard approach to XDR, what we're delivering today, how it's different from some of the competitive solutions out there, you know, what we prioritize and we find is most valuable for our specific market. And we'll finish up the presentation here with a little bit of time for questions. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the content. So yeah, I wanted to start out with probably a story that many of you on the phone have heard about at this point, right? And that's earlier this year, and in July of this year, the announcement that a 158-year organization called K&P Logistics Group, based out of the United Kingdom, actually had to close their doors as the result of a cyber attack. And this actual cyber attack only exploited initially a single credential, and actually was a guest credential of an individual user, right? That allowed this hacker group known as Akira to actually infiltrate K&P and actually get in and start to push ransomware to their various devices and really the infrastructure at large for K&P. And as I said, you know, they were in operation for over 158 years, but when they received this ransom demand for £5 million, right, they simply didn't have the ability to pay that ransom, get their data back, didn't have the confidence that they would be able to get it back in the first place. And they found that their cyber insurance policy, which they did have in place, was not adequate, right, to cover them for the impact of this attack. And as a result, they closed their doors. They had to lay off 700 people, right? It was a significant impact, obviously, on this organization. What highlights the real risk in the dangers that businesses of all shapes and sizes, all complexities across various industries are encountering every day now, as the cyber threat landscape has escalated, right? And that's ultimately because the world has changed, right? An organization like K&P probably 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, really didn't have nearly as much concern about being in the target of or in the crosshairs of cyber attackers. That's changed, right? We see that around 43% of cyber attacks target the smaller organizations out there. And when you look at ransomware specifically, 82% of attacks target organizations with less than 1,000 employees, right? Why is this the case? Because very often these organizations don't have the various security layers that Tom talked about, or they're relying on siloed security layers, right? They maybe have a firewall, maybe they have an endpoint security product, maybe not both, right? And they've sort of relied on that security as good enough. It's no longer good enough, right? And the impact of attacks is also grown, right? We've seen nearly $3 million for the average cost of a breach and downtime, right? And the time it takes to get back to good order being around 22 days. And so just think about what that impact would mean for your business, right? And so if you're on the call, right, and you're talking about, okay, well, we have antivirus today, we have firewall, but maybe I've invested in EDR solution, you know, isn't that good enough? You know, again, that is at this point in time, even though it's more sophisticated than some of the more traditional security layers, doesn't have the visibility into some of the areas of your entire security environment that can be very, very valuable in escalating detection. So things like network traffic, cloud workloads, authentication behavior, right? All that lateral movement and things that an attacker will go through the process of undertaking it as part of their attack, right? EDR doesn't have visibility typically into those types of behaviors. And so we really want to bring more context and enrichment to what we're seeing into individual security layers to surface these really critical attacks. And so we're going to talk about that in more detail as we go forward here. And so I won't spend much time on this slide, but I also want you just to understand the vulnerability and risk that exists in the average environment, the average business today, right? You know, for every 5,000 lines of code that the average application has, there's at least one vulnerability on average in those lines of code, right? And you look at the various operating systems, right? It used to be people would think that, you know, Macs didn't have vulnerabilities or weren't being attacked or exploited. Linux systems, again, minimal viabilities and exploitation, right? That's changed. These operating systems are more prevalent today than they've ever been, and they're certainly in the crosshairs of our cyber attackers more than they've ever been. Obviously, Windows still being the dominant player here for the vulnerabilities just because it's the ubiquitous platform, but the vulnerabilities, the exposures of these operating systems are growing year over year, regardless of the operating system. You know, when we talk about these vulnerabilities, it takes on average 55 days to remediate these critical vulnerabilities, for them to be detected, right? And for patches and things to be issued to close these. And then when we talk about cyber breaches in themselves, right? We see once an attack is within environment, there's an average dwell time between 10 and 15 days, meaning that attacker sits within your environment, mapping it out, figuring out the sensitive areas of the network, right, and really getting an understanding of where they can place their bets to have the greatest impact, right? And then ultimately, when they start their attack, it takes around 2 hours for that final sort of attack stage from when it kicks off to when it's actually complete, for something like a ransomware attack, as an example, going into that encryption phase. And so just an example here of how we're seeing all of this complexity come into play, and why we're having to talk about merging our security layers and defeating some of these silos to help deal with these vulnerabilities and these growing risks. And that brings us to this idea of the cyber defense matrix, a concept developed by Samuel Yu, a security researcher, right? And I think it just does a really nice job of sort of mapping how you should be thinking about the various security layers and capabilities that you can bring to bear to protect your environment. And so you can see on the top here, we have 5 different categories from left to right. On the left-hand side, these are really our proactive approaches we're taking to identify and protect our environment. Our goal here is to have structural awareness, so understand where we have the vulnerabilities, where we have risks, and make the effort to reduce the likelihood of being victimized, falling victim to an attack here, right? And so a lot of your exercises you're going through here are things like cyber hygiene, right? Whether that's password rotation or you know, just closing vulnerabilities, patching systems, right? Having visibility into your security state. You know, Tom talked about security assessments and some of the things that eSecurity offer there. This is the type of activity that you're investing in on this left-hand side. And we call this the left of boom, this prepared, this effort you can make to sort of prepare and identify and protect against cyber attacks before you're actually you're targeted. And the nice thing is, this is where a lot of cyber technologies have existed for a long time. So we can very much rely on technology for some of these pre-event capabilities. But as you move to the right here and you move beyond the sort of the attack phase, and we call this the right of boom. So after that initial cyber impact occurs, this is when you have to focus on reducing the impact. This is when you need to have situational awareness so you know actually what's going on within the environment, right? After that initial breach where they get within the environment, you're looking for the actual bad guys, the evidence of where they've been, their footprints as they club around your network and move laterally within that environment. And so you're using logs, you're looking for evidence of exploit, you're looking for things to trigger on unexpected state changes. So security changes, unexpected behaviors, anomalies to the standard way that your network or your environment behaves, right? And as you move further to the right-hand side, again, from that right into that right of boom, right? Unfortunately, you have to rely a lot more on people, right? That detection process, you'll have AI and various systems that can help flag things, but very often you're going to need somebody triaging these things, making sense of them, seaming them together before you can take a response action, right? And this is ultimately where XDR becomes so valuable. It's because those people on the right-hand side, right, they have a lot they're having to deal with and make sense of when they have siloed security solutions in place, and XDR can seam these things together to set them up for success in the face of an attack when they're focused on reducing the impact of that attack. And so, when we look at this in another way, right, the security challenges that IT teams and you folks will probably be dealing with today as a result of all of this siloed security, right? Individual security layers not communicating to each other. That means limited visibility. You might know what's going on this endpoint, maybe what's going on this firewall, but you can't really correlate those things together without a solution like XDR to make sense of, what's come through the network and maybe ended up on that endpoint and what that means for the broader security environment. The security silos also generate their own logs, their own telemetry, right? And so they're pushing them to different locations typically, right? And this is a very overwhelming amount of data for your team to use and to make sense of. And because you have siloed approaches, automation becomes very, very difficult. And the impact ultimately here is you're missing threats because signals you might have seen by combining, let's say, telemetry from two security layers into one narrative are not there, so you miss those signals, right? And this means you're going to be responding that much slower to attacks than you would if you had more of that context, and that context was enriched with what you were seeing from your various security tools. And so if we look at this, in sort of another way to take a step back and look at how a modern breach occurs and use that cyber defense matrix flow a little bit, here's an example of what a modern ransomware breach looks like. And it's a little bit more sophisticated than the KMP example I started out the presentation with, where there was a guest password. But again, it starts off with exploiting your users. And in this example, right, a user was tricked into entering their credentials into a fraudulent Microsoft 365 page. So they get some email, a phishing email that says, oh, it's time to rotate your password. It's very convincing. They click it. It lands on a landing page that looks just like their Microsoft 365 landing page. But unfortunately, it's a fake website, right? That's designed to just capture their credentials. And the attacker is able to take those credentials, right, and use these credentials to log right into a system. And through that process, they were able to steal a session token and bypass multi-factor authentication. Again, sophisticated approach here. Bypassing multi-factor authentication, we're seeing more and more often, but it is going to take a little bit more of a skilled cyber actor than a brute force simple approach there. And one of the things that we've seen more and more attacks do, and we're seeing in this example, is install a malicious OAuth app. And this allows them to facilitate authentication to other parts of the environment. So they have to bring in this file, they have to bring in this application into the environment, install it, get it set up, and start using it. And once they do that, they're able to start their privilege escalation. So they can appear to be administrators, move within the environment, start scraping emails, start getting into team chats, and getting to those really sensitive documents or files that the customer cares the most about. And the result here is that they were able to exfiltrate 1.9 terabytes of sensitive data before they even drop the ransomware payload, right? And as a result, all of their systems were locked. They're being blackmailed by this this threat actor, right, saying, hey, give us this ransom payment if you want your information back. And that data was still exposed on the dark web that had been stolen. So it's part of a really what we call a dual extortion approach that we're seeing in ransomware today. And so again, if you look at that cyber defense matrix, all the things that really happen from step 3 and on is right of boom activities, things that have happened after the breach, once they're within your environment. And so if you have a solution like XDR in this environment, where you're actually taking data and the telemetry from these various security layers, each one of these actions would be a different log, would be a different flag that would be brought into the XDR system and seamed into a narrative so we can identify some of these activities much faster. Oops, sorry. And so again, if we look at that cyber defense matrix and we start to apply some of the security layers and some of the capabilities here, you know, won't spend a lot of time here because I think you probably have an understanding of those various layers. But on the left-hand side, we're looking at things like patch management, identifying those vulnerabilities, those that are in some of these applications are using. Things like multi-factor authentication for adding that protection, right? You don't want to just be at the mercy of a guest password. Having that additional requirement for the user to log in is still a fundamental security capabilities. But then as you move into detect and respond, this is where you're starting to look for more evidence of a breach. And we'll talk about how WatchGuard approaches some of these things later in the presentation. But when you're looking at things like users and identities, you know, can you identify failed logins, excessive push requests, evidence of a potential a compromised account being used against your environment? When you have those devices, having behavioral detection, anomaly detection, so you know what's going on with the within the environment and see any deviation from what's normal, right? And then your ability to respond. What response capabilities can you bring to bear either automatically or manually across your various security layers, right? And so we'll talk about how WatchGuard approaches these things over the next couple of slides here. And so let's just take a step back. I know, Tom, we started out the presentation with a little bit of a definition here on what XDR is, right? Just to look at how Gartner defines it. Extended detection response, as Tom said, is a vendor-specific threat detection and incident response tool, right? So it is typically a platform approach where a vendor is unifying their various security layers that they offer to aid and improve detection and response capability, right? It requires at least 3 security layers to really be considered an XDR solution, and it combines threat intelligence, again, to help detect and respond to incidents across the system, right? And the reason why it is vendor specific today is because really those reflexive capabilities, that automation capability, requires an innate understanding of typically the platform itself. And this is why we've seen the vendor specific approach be dominant. I will say we are starting to see what we call open XDR, which is allowing you to really extend from that vendor capability to include other security layers from competitors and be able to not only do detection across those layers, but also push responses there. And this is something that is emerging. I think we'll see a lot more in the next year or two because we understand that a lot of customers have, you know, very complex environments, different security vendors. They've chosen maybe best of breed at different times, and they're having to deal with that complexity. So XDR and open XDR could potentially be a solution for some of those things. And so, you know, just to understand and put a finer point out from the WatchGuard perspective, right? WatchGuard really believes that XDR is the future of cybersecurity, especially in this small to medium enterprise market, right? Where you don't have a large IT team, you don't have a large SOC potentially, you don't have a deep bench of security experts, right? You need to maximize the potential of a lean team, make your folks more effective and efficient efficient in how they're operating their security layers and responding to threats as they see them. And so that's really where we think the XDR approach is so important for our customers, right? It allows you to respond to threats faster, right? It gives you better visibility with more context. So you know, okay, I have a piece of malware that's ended up on this endpoint, but you know, where did it come through? What was the network information behind that? Where were the places where I could have potentially blocked it? How can I make sure that other devices don't receive the same piece of malware going forward? It simplifies security operations, right? We'll see this on the left-hand side here. We have really a simple unified threat dashboard, and this is what you would see if you were using our XDR solution, right? You have all your incidents flagged critical, high, medium, low, right? So you know where to prioritize. You have the incident types categorized and bucketed so you can understand, you know, what happened where, what the cause of it was, and obviously some visualizations of the timeline so you can see, you know, what that behavior looks like over a period of time. And the nice thing is with our approach to XDR, we include our fundamental XDR capabilities called ThreatSync Core with our WatchGuard cloud solution. So if you, let's say, purchased a multi-factor authentication off-point solution with WatchGuard, you would automatically get this XDR capability in WatchGuard Cloud with that ThreatSync Core capability. And that just means the more security layers you add, so if you were to add a firewall from WatchGuard or endpoint security, all of that is plugged into the same XDR system and adds more and more value as you build out that platform approach. And ultimately, this results in more efficiency and lower costs for operating your security for your entire environment. And so if we look at, you know, the ThreatSync approach and really ultimately how it functions and the various ways that the tools plug into it today, again, it's an integrated platform for delivering XDR, right? It offers automated, scheduled, and manual response actions with some third-party integrations today. You can prioritize and display your incidents, right? We like to say, really start your day with ThreatSync. We have customers, that's exactly what they do. Their analysts, the first dashboard they look at is their list of incidents, prioritized and listed every day when they come in for work and start trying to make sense of what's shifted in their security. And it has machine learning to do that correlation and detection. And today we have really all of our security layers in the portfolio plugged into ThreatSync. So you get the firebox for network security, you get Wi-Fi so you can detect rogue access points within your Wi-Fi environment. All that endpoint telemetry and authentication information is sent to this ThreatSync system, right? And again, enters into a system for threat scoring of both indicators and incidents so you can prioritize, know what's most important, and take action against those threats. And a big part of what we're doing here is those response actions. If you detect, as an example, an endpoint action, it'll be correlated with some telemetry from the firebox. You have confidence that this is a risk or concern, and you can actually take immediate impact to either isolate that device, kill the process that's malicious behind the scenes on that device, or actually delete the file that's associated with that malicious action. Again, with just a matter of clicks, you can do that process, or build automation to say, look, if this threat score goes above an 8 from malware detection, as an example, automatically isolate the endpoint. So let's say you detect something late at night when you're not at your security dashboard, it can take that action for you automatically until you come in and actually refresh the endpoint and bring it back into good order. So a really powerful way that we're again right in WatchGuard Cloud with our free ThreatSync offering, bringing XDR to this market. And so if we look at sort of a finer point here from a security layer perspective, how ThreatSync integrates with the different security layers that we offer, right? WatchGuard Authpoint is a great example. If you're not familiar with Authpoint today, this is our multi-factor authentication solution, right? So it's a mobile app typically that folks use for push challenges. You log in with a password, a push is sent out to your mobile device or your user's mobile device, and they have to accept that push, right? And behind the scenes, there's more complex understanding, right? What network are they connecting to? Are they connecting at a normal time from a normal location, from a country that we're used to seeing them connect from? All that level of sophistication is something that we can see as part of the off-point solution. But with ThreatSync, we're bringing in even more visibility and more control, and the ability to apply policies, so you can start to identify, compromised credentials and threat actors potentially using compromised credentials against your environment. And so I have some examples here of what we call risky correlated detections, right? And so things like 10 incorrect password login attempts, right? So if a user account is doing that, 3 consecutive failed attempts, things like, somebody disabling push notifications. If someone were to actually go into their mobile device, turn off the push, right? That is a sign potentially that a threat actor is manipulating their device and has control of the device. And so all of these different detections, right? Again, you can build policy around, you can build responses around to say, look, okay, I have 4 or more denied authentication attempts within 15 minutes. You know what, let's just block that user automatically until I can investigate, I can understand what's going on. But because these things are also correlated, you could do things like block the attacker's IP address. So if somebody is, you believe exploiting or trying to log into one of your user's account from an IP address that you don't trust is that authentic user's, right? You can block the network access and stop that attack as well. Again, because you're unifying these security layers together. And if you look at the endpoint security approach, right, one thing to understand, and I think Tom did a nice job talking about this sort of the XDR approach and how everybody really in the vendor space has a different approach. One of the things you'll see as you look at how different vendors talk about XDR is many of them are coming from a genesis of the endpoint security arena. And so one of the things that they've done with XDR is try and bring in more intelligence to their EDR products into their endpoint capabilities, right? So they can find the more severe attacks earlier stage in the process. And that's one of the reasons EDR vendors have really invested in XDR capabilities. And so, WatchGuard, we have a very full-featured EDR component. Our genesis is more of network security, and I'll talk about why that is a little bit different in the next couple of slides. But just wanted to talk about the fact that our endpoint security solution is integrated into ThreatSync, right? And our intel is automatically shared across our various security layers. So the systems are learning from various detections. So if you detect something on the endpoint, the network is informed of that. If the network finds something, endpoints are informed of that detection. And we have that ability to respond, to delete the file, isolate the device, kill the process. And with certain licenses of our EDR product, the administrator can actually take remote control of the device if they need to do a deeper triage, a deeper cleaning of that. And you can see here on the right-hand side an example of what these detections look like. Your prioritized list of endpoint detections, right? Again, listed in threats, listed and scored here, and then a deeper look here of an attack that was actually already blocked by an automatic response, but giving you some additional response actions that you could take here to subsequently delete the file or isolate the computer if you wanted to take that further action. And so then that brings us to our ThreatSync Plus solution, right? And so, I mentioned the fact that WatchGuard's genesis is ultimately network security. We've been really started in the firewall space in 1996, and that's sort of been our core focus. And one of the things to understand about the XDR approach and why it's been so popular with EDR vendors is they're trying to bring in that network context into the view and into the various security silos because the value that visibility of the network provides, right? Again, a cyber attacker really has to touch your network in some way to be successful in a cyber attack. And that's why having that visibility, having that intelligence on the network and bringing that into endpoint endpoint or authentication context can be so powerful. And so our ThreatSync Plus solution is our artificial intelligence engine that we introduced in the summer timeframe last year to allow us to do some anomaly detection. What it'll actually do is overwatch your entire network, so looking at all the traffic that hits your firebox, as well as all the traffic that hits your network routers and your switches, right? And performs a baseline to understand what normal looks like. So what are the users connecting to? What are their normal login times? What are the volumes of files and things like that we would see in a typical period of time, and creates that baseline over time, and obviously continually refreshes it. But any deviation from that baseline is then flagged and scored and then compared with behaviors and the normal considerations of what we would see and associate with the threat, right? And from there, what you can actually do is score that information and respond to that information in some of the ways that I talked about on the previous slide. So it's really this introduction of very sophisticated artificial intelligence engine that can overlay everything and provide that anomaly-based detection in addition to the correlation that you get with just the standard ThreatSync XDR approach. And so, if you're familiar with WatchGuard and what we've done on the network security side of the house, this really, again, is taking some of that tremendous intelligence you can get out of your fireboxes already and expanding on it by bringing in the context of your routers, your switches, and applying that artificial intelligence engine. So the firebox, they scan around 1 billion security scans every hour. So there's a tremendous amount of security intelligence being generated by these platforms alone. And why it's such a critical part of our approach to XDR. And when you look again at that ThreatSync Plus capability, the addition of the network detection response, you really start to expand the capabilities of unified detection in XDR, right? On the left-hand side here, I'm showing the core detections of ThreatSync Core, our XDR approach I talked about. Things like detecting those failed logins, the token abuse, right, from the authentication capability, finding your viruses and malware in the network behaviors, as well as the endpoint detection capabilities. But with our ThreatSync Plus capabilities, we're actually adding even more detections on top of that. So things like the internal to external port scans and beaconing, things that are evidence that somebody is within your environment and is trying to do some reconnaissance within the environment. The ThreatSync Plus SaaS capabilities here, really looking at cloud access behavior and file movement, and really broadening the scope of XDR into some of those cloud environments. And then again, bringing them all together for response capabilities as well. And the holistic solution with the ThreatSync Plus and our ThreatSync XDR solution includes around 36 AI-powered detections for ransomware alone. So the mutual solution here, much more powerful with the inclusion of the ThreatSync Plus capability. And so just to sort of finish up with one of the things that I think Tom did a pretty nice job talking about to start the presentation, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but a lot of folks, when we talk about XDR, they say, what's the difference between XDR and something like a SIEM, a security information and event management system? And so, the way we look at it at WatchGuard is XDR is really best for those small teams who want to reduce dwell time and respond to threats faster, right? So if you're trying to solve for, improving security reaction time, really XDR is a great fit. But when you have things like compliance requirements, a need for greater forensic retention, so if you need to, let's say, go back in time and investigate how threats maybe came within your environment, let's say, 6 months, 8 months, a year out, or you have a large security operations team today, a security information and event management system we think is a good fit there. Most of our customers tend to fall on the left-hand side, so that's where our focus has been, but just wanted to sort of compare and contrast here with those two different approaches. And just sort of bring it all back to the cyber defense matrix, right? And sort of where we fall when you look at the WatchGuard stack, right? If you look at those users and identities, we have coverage across identity all the way to response with WatchGuard off point today and our multi-factor authentication capabilities. Same things with our endpoint security, all the way to that recover, the idea you can return an endpoint back to an original state or a previous state to get back in good order. And then we talk about network and with our Firebox capabilities and NDR. Well, but with our ThreatSync XDR capabilities, we're really seaming these various layers together, right? We're helping them communicate back and forth with each other. We're giving you a single stream of incidents that are scored, prioritized, with the ability to click in and respond immediately or by policy automatically. And that's a key part of the value of what we're delivering with our XDR approach here at WatchGuard. So with that, I think we have maybe a couple more minutes here for some questions. I very much appreciate the time, and thank you very much to eSecurity for inviting me to the webinar today. I have enjoyed it quite a bit, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Hey, Stephen, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Is your new SASE solutions, are those also included in ThreatSync?
They are not quite yet, but that is aggressively on the roadmap. That's a great question. So if you're not familiar with the SASE solution, right, it's this idea that sort of remote users can enjoy the same security as the on-network users, right, extending that network protection essentially to users wherever they connect, wherever they go. And so having the ability to detect a threat maybe that's targeting that user when they're traversing or traveling around is a critical thing we want to add. So it's absolutely on the roadmap. That's a great question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I mean, from my point of view, XDR is a requirement. It's a question of how good that the vendors themselves, like WatchGuard, actually implement it and how much value you can add. It's not an option. It's included in what you do, and it's a focus so that you can differentiate your platform, and that's important. The other thing I want to mention it while we do sell an MDR SIM solution service, we do offer very attractive price points for that as well. So it's not, we have many small businesses that are using our SIM SOC for MDR. And again, at my point, it doesn't compete with XDR. It's a totally different thing. So I just want to say, as next steps go, if you really look at the risk management process for regulation compliance or good security, everything starts with third-party risk assessments, defining your prioritized gaps in your security, defining your prioritized solutions, putting that into a roadmap of how you're going to implement it and develop it and roll it out, and then acquiring the solutions, implementing them, and managing them. And in that process, when you're acquiring your solutions, defining, whose solutions you want to standardize on more than others, and therefore which XDR platform you're really focused on. So WatchGuard has great solutions. They are continuing to add more and more, and they integrate them into their XDR platform, which is one of the reasons they're one of our favorite partners. So with that, I would say we have finished our presentation today. Also, one last thing. So we do have a MetaQuest 2 VR headset we're giving away. In order to qualify for that, you had to have participated and watched the entire presentation, which we can tell because you're basically showing up on our console. And then lastly, we need you to fill out the 3-question survey at the end, which will show up on the screen when I sign out here. So if you do all of that, you qualify for the MetaQuest 2 VR headset. Thank you very much for attending. We will clearly follow up with you, and this was more of an educational thing for you to understand how vendors such as WatchGuard can add value, and also how to differentiate between the levels of solutions and what they do for you. So we're obviously here to help you in any way that we can, and I've kind of highlighted some of the things that we can do for you along with WatchGuard. So anyway, thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to talking to you soon.